Welcome again, Morning Manna, day 2, as we study the story of Naaman. We're studying together in 2 Kings chapter 5. I've really enjoyed studying in my own time and my planning process of kind of looking at the story. It's the story of Naaman. If you want to see where I am in today's section of the story, you could pause me right now and read 2 Kings chapter 5, probably verses 5 through verse 8. That'll give you the section that we're talking about. So I kind of introduced you to some of the cast of characters last week. Mostly what I want to talk about over our time together in these 6 days is obviously Naaman. We know him. We talked a little bit about his servant yesterday. Also, there are 2 kings, Ben-Hadad, who is Naaman's king, and then Joram, who is the king of Israel. We'll talk about those guys a little bit today. Obviously, there's Elisha, and he's the guy who performs the miracle. He's the prophet in Israel. We'll talk just a little bit about some of the attendants who are with Naaman when he goes to find Elisha. And then we'll finish off our time talking about a guy named Gehazi. But right now, I want to focus in on the kings and a little bit again on the servant girl. Remember from yesterday, it's her faith, it's her belief that if Naaman will go, if he'll leave his town, if he'll leave his country, and he'll go to Israel and find God's prophet, then he'll be healed of leprosy. And so she convinces him. He's probably desperate. Like he's probably willing to do. I'm sure he's tried everything, all that money could buy to try and cure his physical body. I'm sure he's done it. So he's like, okay. And he's going to spend a lot of money, a king's ransom, to try and get healing. So he goes to his king, says, can you help me out? The king says, absolutely. I'll write a letter to Joram, who's the king of Israel, and I will get him to get his prophet to heal you. Of course, when Joram gets this letter, he is so freaked out. If we read more of Kings and even in Chronicles, we'd know why. It's because Joram is separated from God. He has fallen into idolatry. He's worshiping false gods. He's allowed sin in his life. There's no presence of God in his life, which means there's no power. There's no access to power. Joram is concerned because he's like, oh my gosh, he wants to go to war against me again. Read around it and you'll see that Israel and the king of Aram end up in war, even in the next chapter. Of course, Elisha, we're going to see this in a minute. Elisha's like, look, bring him. He can get healed. But the king of Israel doesn't have that relationship with God. The lack of God's presence in his life has cut him off from what God does. And I think this is such an interesting contrast with the servant girl who yesterday we see it's her faith that starts this miracle. And really, the king of Israel should be in the spot where he's leading the children of Israel in a relationship with God where everyone around can look in and see and go, wow, I want to worship that God. But King Joram doesn't have it. I know you do. I know that's why you're watching this video, why you're taking that time of devotion. Let's remember that it's in God's presence that we experience his power, and let's stay tucked in with him today. Come back next week. We'll talk a little bit more, not next week, tomorrow. You knew that anyway. We'll talk a little bit more about this story. God bless you.